All right, we'll finish up chapter 14 today and do a little bit of chapter 15. So basically, let me review back a little bit. In verse 37, verse 36, remember Saul said, "Let us go down after the Philistines by night and plunder them till dawn, and let us not leave one of them alive." And his men are half-heartedly for this. They just basically, say, do whatever seems best to you. So you can tell that they're not really sold out on this idea. And so the priest comes and says, let's ask God what he has a suggestion about what we should do. And if you look at Saul, he never asked God about anything, pretty much. He just does kind of what he pleases, or if he comes up with an idea, he thinks that idea is fine. He never consults God. He does not have a close relationship with God. So Saul said, okay, I'll go along with that. I'll inquire of God. So he does. He asks God. He questions God. He says, shall I go down after the Philistines? Will you give them into Israel's hand? But God did not answer him that day. So God did not answer his prayer. God is not on board with what Saul's planning to do. So Saul immediately figures, okay, this is because somebody has sinned. That's why God's not answering my prayer. Did he ever think that maybe God didn't answer his prayer because he's the one that sinned? And then he goes back. What's the thing that he thinks has been violated? And the thing he thinks has been violated is, remember he told the people, all his soldiers and everything, you can't eat until after we've completely destroyed the Philistines. And so you've got an army that because of you, they're starving, they're hungry, and yet you expect them to fight well. So he figures, well, somebody has violated my command to take an oath. Now the problem is, Saul came up with the idea of not eating. But he made the people swear an oath to God. So that made the oath binding to the people that took that oath. So even though Saul was in the wrong, God still honors himself. So if you're going to make an oath to me, you're going to have to keep it. So that being the case, Saul, the next thing he does, he divides up everybody. He and Jonathan stand here, and then all the other soldiers are over here. So he asked the high priest to cast lots. And the lot fell on Saul and Jonathan. So right off the bat, all the men have been vindicated. You know that none of those men broke that oath before God. So the problem is over here between Saul and Jonathan. Who broke the oath? And they cast the lots again. The priest is doing this. And the lot fell on Jonathan. And you remember, Jonathan did eat honey, but Jonathan also never took the oath because he didn't know anything about it. He was off doing God's work, defeating the Philistines, while the king, his father, was coming up with ideas to glorify himself. So the problem, Saul thinks, is with Jonathan. So Saul's basically obsessed with himself. And remember I said last week, he uses God as a convenience. He uses a fear of the Lord to control his people. And that's what he's doing here. And watch how God controls this situation. Once it falls on Jonathan, now here God answers Saul's prayer too, because Saul prayed that God would show him who had violated the oath, and sure enough, it was Jonathan. But Jonathan didn't take the oath. He only violated what Saul told him to do. He didn't violate what God told him to do, and he didn't take the oath. So, in order to impress, and that's all Saul's doing here, he's going to kill Jonathan because he thinks that's where the problem is. That's why God's not answering. So he's going to go so far with his ego and his control of the men by using God as his crutch and showing what a godly man he is. I'm so godly and I'm so in touch with God that I'm going to kill my own son for breaking the oath. Jonathan didn't break the oath because he never took it. But that doesn't come out here in the Bible. It's earlier it said he never took it because he didn't know about it. So anyway, in verse 44, Saul even says, "May God deal with me, be it ever so severely, if you do not die." So Saul's saying, I've got to kill you because God will deal with me harshly for not killing you. And Jonathan steps up, and in the verse before that, Jonathan says, "I tasted a little honey, and now I must die." So Jonathan's thinking, you're out of your mind. And this is insubordination in a big way. All of the men, but the men in verse 45 said to Saul, "Should Jonathan die, he who has brought about this great deliverance in Israel? Never. As surely as the Lord lives, not a hair of his head will fall to the ground, for he did this today with God's help." So the men rescued Jonathan. He was not put to death. So the whole entire army realizes what's going on. They tell Saul, the only reason that we were victorious over the Philistines today is because of Jonathan and his obedience to God, not yours. And so they stop Jonathan from being killed. Now this is a bad situation for a king, isn't it? When your entire military says, you're not going to do something, that king has no authority and no power from that point on, pretty much, if that happens. So already you can see Saul's kingdom, before it even gets started real good, is falling apart. And the day ends with, it says, Saul stopped pursuing the Philistines and they withdrew to their own land. So not only did they not pursue them, this day ends. After this great battle and victory, it ends with, well, I'm just going to quit and y'all go home. So everything that God had done for them, basically, Saul has made it worthless. So the men disband, they go home, Saul goes back to his house, and the whole thing's just an utter failure because of Saul. After that, the rest of the chapter, it discusses Saul's successes as a leader, as a king, and there were some successes. Look at your map. And you'll see, if you look at the map, this tells you what territory was under the control of each of the three kings, Saul, David, and Solomon. And if you look, Saul is the one in sort of the pinkish color. That's the area that he controlled as king and that he conquered as he was king. So that's how big the nation of Israel technically was that was actually controlled. So that area was under the control of Saul. And you notice that he's got control of both sides of the Jordan River. So he's got some control on the east side as well as the west side. So that's his kingdom. And then you'll notice how much bigger that kingdom is. David's in the gray or light blue. That's his kingdom, which added to Saul's kingdom. And that's a big increase. And then lastly, the part in green is the extra territory. Do you have one?
Mine's different.
Yeah, that's a different one. Yeah, that's a good one. That's the tribes in there. Same territory, but so anyway, the pinkish color is Saul, the bluish gray color is David, and then the last addition to that empire is in the green at the top, and that is the added territory under Solomon. And that's the biggest extension of the nation of Israel. And pretty much a map of Israel today looks very similar to this. If you look at that town at the top above the green, Aleppo is in Syria. And think about this, Aleppo still exists. People still live in Aleppo. And it was a tragedy of all the antiquities that were destroyed during the Syrian Civil War and all of the stuff that went on there. But so they almost got to Aleppo when they expanded the kingdom. And they did get, if you look at the upper right corner there of Solomon's kingdom, he got all the way to the river Euphrates. What you'll notice, though, is if you look at Philistia, that little section in sort of a sandy color on the Mediterranean Sea, where Gaza is today, that's exactly the same shape that Gaza is today. And what do you see that never happened to that little section? It's never under the control of any of these three kings. And it's not under the control of Israel today. And the reason that I believe that Gaza was never captured then, that until Israel turns to God as a nation, there will always be the Philistines to punish them for their disobedience to God. And that is not going to change until Jesus rules and reigns over the nation of Israel. And I think it's amazing that that little strip of land that contained the Philistines is still the same strip of land that's given so much trouble to the Jews today. And every time, now the Philistines were under control under David and Solomon. Once David and Solomon had taken and beaten the Philistines on several different occasions, they just kind of went back home and stayed there, but they never went away. They were always there, and they were always independent. They were never controlled or ruled by the nation of Israel under any of these kings. And what they did is when Israel would fall away from God, the Philistines would have power again to cause death and destruction to the Jews. Every time Israel fell away, this little tiny square that contained the Philistines, they would rise up and be used to punish the nation of Israel for its lack of obedience to God. So that's the situation of the three kings. Gives you an idea how much land they controlled. And the next section of chapter 14, it gives the lineage of Saul's family. And there's only two names here that I think are worth really knowing who they are. And the first one is Michal, M-I-C-H-A-L. That's Saul's youngest daughter. That she would become David's first wife. Now, she really loved David, and they get married, but we'll talk more about that later because there's quite a bit of time given in the book of Samuel here about that marriage and how it came about and all that kind of stuff. But she's important because she will be David's first wife. Also, something that's kind of odd is the commander of Saul's army in verse 50 was Abner. Abner was a cousin. If you look at the lineage, you can figure it out there. Abner was a cousin of Saul. That doesn't make any sense either. That shows poor judgment. Why would you make a cousin in charge of your army when you've just seen that your son, Jonathan, had a good relationship with God, and just his son and his son's armor bearer initiated the rout of the entire Philistine army by themselves under the power of God? Why would you use somebody else ever to be in charge of your army after you'd seen what your son could do? So that makes no sense. So that's another indication that Saul was not a good leader. So we'll end, that's chapter 14. Now we'll do the first couple verses in chapter 15. And Elisa, would you mind reading 1 Samuel 15, 1 through 4?
Samuel said to Saul, I am the one the Lord sent to anoint you king over his people Israel. So listen now to the message from the Lord. This is what the Lord Almighty says. I will punish the Amalekites for what they did to Israel when they waylaid them as they came up from Egypt. Now go, attack the Amalekites and totally destroy all that belongs to them. Do not spare them. Put to death men and women, children and infants, cattle and sheep, camels and donkeys. So Saul summoned the men and mustered them at Telaim, 200,000 foot soldiers and 10,000 from Judah.
Thank you. Okay. Samuel comes to Saul again, and he wants to make sure that Saul understands his position. And Samuel's going to explain that very detailed in a short few words. The first thing he says is, I am the one the Lord sent to anoint you. So, Saul, there's a pecking order here. God's first. I'm his messenger. I'm the one that anointed you because God told me to. You need to listen to me because I'm second in command here. God's first, I'm second, and Saul, you're here for one thing, to carry out God's will for the people of Israel. And that makes Saul, the king of Israel, should be what? He should be a servant of the true king. And also the king is a servant to the people too, because he is serving the people by doing God's will for them. That's the idea that God had when he's going to set up kingship for Israel. That king would not only be their king, he would also be God's representative on earth, and he would also, the king, would be a servant to his people. Who fits that definition perfectly? Jesus Christ, the true king of the nation of Israel. He came as their king the first time they rejected him. But he came to serve God and to serve man in the fact that if he was the king of Israel, he would be serving his people because they would be serving God. That's what God had planned. Do any of these kings that ever ruled Israel, even David and Solomon, ever come close to fulfilling God's desire for a king for Israel? No. There's only one person that can do that, and that's Jesus Christ. And he will do that someday. And that's why there must be a millennial kingdom, because he is going to do what he came to do. And if you remember when he was on the cross, the caption over his cross was, Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. And Pilate asked him, are you the King of the Jews? And he said, you have said rightly so. He never denied that. And that's what he is going to do. He's going to do what has never been done yet. And so Jonathan is going to give, Samuel's going to give Saul a message. This is what the Lord Almighty says. So Saul, this isn't what I'm saying. This is what God says. And you need to listen to me, because I'm telling you what God said. I will punish the Amalekites for what they did to Israel when they waylaid them as they came up from Egypt. Now, do you think God forgets anything? No. Do you know how long it's been since the Amalekites did what God's talking about right here when they came up from Egypt? It's been 400 years approximately. What they did was 400 years ago. Now, they did do other things too. They were constantly a thorn in the side of the Israelites. But the key event that they did when they first came out of Egypt was 400 years ago. That's how much time has passed since they left Egypt. So, a lot of implications here. God doesn't forget. And he doesn't fail to keep his promises. And just because there's a lot of time in between doesn't mean that he's not going to do what he said. And so that's what they're getting ready to do. Now, quick reference, why? What did they do? Who are they? They're descendants of Esau. So that kind of puts them on a bad foot right there when it comes to the nation of Israel. So they're descended from Esau, and their territory was in southern Egypt area in the desert in the Negev. That's kind of where they were, and they were Bedouins, but they worked their way up and constantly harassed the Jews. But the specific thing, look at Exodus chapter 17, and this will start the narrative. Exodus chapter 17, verse 8. The Amalekites came and attacked the Israelites at Rephidim. Moses said to Joshua, choose some of our men and go out to fight the Amalekites. Tomorrow I will stand on top of the hill with the staff of God in my hand. So that's the first time they attacked them. And you know that the Israelites are successful here. As long as Moses can keep his hands up, they win the battle. When he couldn't, it switched to the Amalekites. But they started their problems attacking Israel early in Israel's journey in the desert. And then Deuteronomy, here's the prophecy that's fulfilled. Turn to Deuteronomy chapter 25. And it's in verse 17 through 19. And it says, remember, this is Moses here. Remember what the Amalekites did to you along the way when you came out of Egypt? When you were weary and worn out, they met you on your journey and cut off all who were lagging behind. They had no fear of God. When the Lord your God gives you rest from all the enemies around you in the land he is giving you to possess as an inheritance. You shall blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. Do not forget. So, 400 years ago, God told Moses, and Moses wrote it down, one of these days, you're going to kill every Amalekite alive. And I'm going to do it. And that's the promise he made. And now that's the prophecy that he's going to fulfill. Now, all through the time of the judges, the Amalekites, Philistines, all of them constantly harassed Israel from time to time. But the specific sin that God's going to wipe them out for is what they did to the Israelites in the desert when they were defenseless, hungry, starving to death. And the stragglers, they would just kill the stragglers as they fell behind and just kept doing that all the way up to the armies. I mean, up to the main body. So they were a terrible people. Now, the punishment is explained. And that's in verse 3. Now go, attack the Amalekites, and totally destroy everything that belongs to them. Do not spare them. Put to death men and women, children and infants, cattle, sheep, camels, and donkeys. And the word destroy there, and your NIV text will explain that. It's got a footnote. But basically, the Hebrew word for destroy, actually, it's an idiom. It means the total giving over of one to God. That's what it means. And in this case, that totally giving them over to God is not for their salvation, it's for their total destruction. And that's what God wants. He wants them destroyed. Now, do you think in your mind that this is a little harsh? Forget who's telling them to do this and be practical in your mind. Would you really be in support if Israel went into Gaza and in the process of getting rid of Hamas, killed every single man, woman, little baby, and that's how they got rid of Hamas? Is there anybody here that would think that's a good idea? No. That just doesn't register to us. But that's what God said do. And in one way, there is some mercy shown here. It's hard to find. But do you realize that when he kills all the children and infants, where they're going to be? They're going to be in heaven. And they're going to be okay. And they're going to be perfect. Because he's not holding the innocent responsible for that. And the Bible teaches that. David is one example. When his son died at the age of 2, David said, he cannot come to me, but I can go to him. So we know, based on that, that little boy never had a chance to make a decision for Jesus one way or the other. And that would be the case of the kids, the Amalekite children. So, in one way, about the only way an Amalekite is going to get to heaven is if they die as an infant or a child. And so, if you look at it that way, there is some grace in what God's doing here. And also, something else that, and people don't like this, so you don't hear much about it. Who called for this destruction in order to give these people completely over to God? God did. And if you look Jesus is God. And what you see commanded here to do to the Amalekites is exactly what, in the revelation of Jesus, that he is going to do to the entire population of the earth that doesn't accept him. He is going to kill and destroy every one of them before he sets up his kingdom. So God doesn't change, and Jesus is God. What changed was when, my nose is running. What changed was the period of grace that we live in. We don't see that side of God and Jesus because we're under grace. We're living in the church age, which that's not in the Old Testament. There's no prophecy about the church. It's a special time that God set aside his plan to build his church. And we live under grace. We don't live under that harsh reality of the sovereignty of God and his hatred for sin so bad that the only way he can get rid of it is to kill all mankind. That's what he did with Noah. He only saved 8 people and destroyed everybody else on earth. And Jesus is that God. And people don't like to think about that. Oh, Jesus wouldn't do that. He's going to do it, and he did do it. He is God. And that's what we need to think about. We are fortunate and privileged to live in this one time only period of grace where all you have to do is accept Christ as your Savior. And all of this stuff is taken care of. But that's going to end. And when it does, the harsh judgment and reality of sin and God's sovereignty is going to return, and there's going to be total destruction. And it's going to be fair, because Jesus can only be fair. So that's what you need to think about and put into perspective when you see these horrible things happen in the Old Testament. They're going to happen again. And it's revealed in the book of Revelation. So that's what is going to take place. And then verse 4, and we'll stop there. Verse 4 says, so Saul summoned the men and mustered them at Telem, and 200,000 foot soldiers and 10,000 men from Judah. So he's got this huge army again, all of a sudden out of nowhere. You remember the last time we heard how many people he had? He had 600, didn't he? So here again is another miracle of God. From 600, we get 200,000 plus 10,000 from Judah. So anyway, that army's amassed, and they're getting ready to go do what God wants them